A very good evening to everyone present in this online meeting. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the fourth day of this 8-day long faculty development program on development journalism organized by Press Club Kolkata and St. Xavier's University in collaboration with Unicef, West Bengal. Dear participants, as we all know, development is something every country is striving for, and in this endeavor, media can play a pivotal role. It is in this regard that development journalism comes to the center stage, which can help in creating awareness among the masses and bring the necessary behavioral changes. Now, to divulge more on the intricacies of development journalism, we have two eminent academicians today who are going to share their valuable knowledge and experience on the topic. So, without wasting any more time, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Ujjwal K Chowdhury, who will be speaking on how to make development stories more interesting. But before this, I would like to read a brief introduction of the speaker. Professor Chaudhary is a maverick who travels between communication academics and its practice, between profession and social engagement, between traveling and staying put. Currently, the strategic advisor and a professor with Daffodil International University of Dhaka, Brent consultant with Kolkata-based Adamas University, and the vice president of Global Media Education Council, he was till 2021 the pro-vice chancellor of Adamas University and has been earlier the dean of Symbiosis and Amity Universities, apart from Pearl Academy and Whistling Woods International. He has been a wanderer, working as a media consultant in Nepal, consulting with Amsterdam Film School in Netherlands, working on films for WHO in several nations, and working with Aku Media in Dubai. He speaks and writes on various platforms and works in civil society initiatives on media, entrepreneurship, and democracy. He runs a school for the children of the marginalized communities of the Sundarban area of Bengal in memory of his late mother, Srimati Anu Chaudhary. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Now, before I ask Chaudhary sir, Professor Ujjwal Chaudhary sir to continue, I would request Professor Snehashi Sood sir to please speak something.
Thank you very much, Nitesh sir. It is really an honor and privilege for me to welcome Professor Ujjwal K Chowdhury, my old friend. I would also welcome the HOD of Mass Communication, Dr. Reshmi Noshkar, and Professor Harish Kumar sir of St. Xavier's University, Kolkata, and all other participants. Welcome. I'll not take time because we have spoken in the inaugural and we have made things clear that this is a trio approach from the international body dedicated to development, then the body of academics, and then the body of professionals. And you are the faculties. So if your capacity is enhanced, the future scribes will be better off in understanding and delivery, and future media educators will be better off. Our goal is to improve the world, and we are in the process. Development is inevitable. Development journalism has a great role. But I'll be failing in my duty if I do not especially welcome this evening Professor Ujjwal K Chowdhury. He is a person, a globetrotter, and at a time he handles so many assignments and with precision. He's a good speaker, but today his commitment is being shown again when he is going to have a planned surgery. Still, he has decided to come and attend and address our participants. This speaks of his deep commitment to journalism, development, media, and he has been a media practitioner as well as a media educator and a planner of a lot of activities and consultant. Professor Chaudhary is a good friend of mine. Sir, on behalf of each and every one present here, we wish you a successful surgery and speedy recovery so that you come back with colors and with a better engagement in what you believe that you should do. Sir, We are really touched by your commitment and we are grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Over to Nitish to request Professor UKC to kindly begin.
Thank you so much, sir. With this, now I request Professor Chaudhary, sir, to please address the participants. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nitesh. And thank you, Sneha Sizda, our very good friend and someone who has been spearheading the Committee of Journalists in Calcutta, the oldest press club of Asia, for quite some time, very, very effectively. I also thank Madam Sucharita Bardhan, who heads communication of Unicef in eastern part of India, and who has been constantly supporting academics' search for better practice, both of learning and practitioners' search for better practice of the profession. From Rajasthan to here, everywhere, she has been really supporting very strongly. Thank you for day after tomorrow I'll have a major surgery, total hip replacement on my left leg, and that needs a 90 days, minimum 90 days focused recovery period. I was not sure because I was supposed to join the hospital today. I delayed it to tomorrow morning to meet my compatriots, my peers in both profession and academics here. I really appreciate the theme of taking development journalism in its totality from various angles. So one of the angles today given to me is how do you make the stories interesting? Everyone knows a story on agriculture is important. A story on health is important. A story on migrant labor is extremely important. A story on climate change is important. But people don't read them. People don't watch them. How do you make it interesting? So that's the commonest question that journalists think of. I know this online thing is really little, tough. You can't look into the eyes of the people and speak. And there is all the more possibility that people might be engaged elsewhere and then also listening. I just would request, I won't take too much of a time, maybe 30-35 minutes, and then there can be questions. So let's try to put this time so that I get a feedback from you on what we are discussing and also how we can do it better. So what makes things interesting? First, let's try to understand a very simple layman's language. I'm not going to talk about theories of interest. I'm just asking basic question. How and when does a journalistic story, either in print or in television or on the internet, is interesting? When does it become interesting? In my opinion, there are things like, entertainment stories, revealing pictures and all that. I'm not getting into that. If I'm seeking good journalism, still, in that case, what makes it interesting? Surely stories of real life people. When we talk stories of real life people and stories that actually you can relate to, a story in whether in your vicinity or of people that you know or of people that you can relate to. Such stories are interesting. The commonest answer to that. That means stories you can emotionally connect. If I begin a story, climate change is a major challenge before the people, and every year so many trees are being cut and all that, and I start giving a very green picture of the climatic changes happening now, I may put off my reader in the first paragraph. So unless the reader connects emotionally, he doesn't invest intellectually. One is to connect emotionally to invest intellectually in a story. Even reading a story for 25 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 minutes is also an investment of time. So first thing, emotional quotient. Does the story have high emotional quotient? My one simple thumb rule is Does it start with the story of a human life, with a real life? Does it start with a story of a person who is affected by the issue that you are discussing, or who is the beneficiary of something that you are discussing? So the first point, first criterion of interesting development story is emotional connect, or high emotional quotient, that can come through stories of people and their quotes, their graphic details of their lives, in such a manner that you can emotively connect to those stories, that or those stories, thereby the full story. So that's point one. The point two, does the story motivate you to take some action? Any action. That simplest action can be forwarding that story. Wow, this is really good. Nitesh must read it. He loves such stories. I forward it to him. That's the simplest action. The bigger action can be that you contribute to that organization, money or time, that you talk about it in public place. So some action do you take. If you're too much moved by something, you may even decide to be a part of that organization. So passion quotient, an interesting story, is something that connects you emotionally and elevates you passionately. The passion quotient is my second criterion of an interesting development story. I will put intellectual quotient last. No, not last, next. There are other aspects also we'll look at. Intellectual quotient next. How do I build in the intellectual quotient? Once I have established the story of a human life, family, man, woman, or child, and made it through a very passionate description of their lives, issues, and their quotes, I can move next to the facts and figures of that issue. I will give examples, don't worry. Let me first put the theory and then we'll go into the examples. So the third thing is stories must be backed by relevant, selective data. Not any and everything that I lay my hands on. Not all types of information. Information overload is indigestion, leads to indigestion. So it's not information overload. Very selective, relevant information and data which are interpreted and visually well represented. That means, can I present selective data, which are very important in this context? And if possible, can I give those data with an infographics? I need not tell you what is infographics, where a graphics explains the concept of the story in a small picture or diagram or facts and figures put in a graphical manner. So when I give a human story, put passion quotient behind it and make people connect emotionally and passionately, then move to the intellectual part where I give the relevant data and the infographics. And data visualization and data journalism is important in this context. When I do these two things together, I'm combining EQ, PQ, and IQ in that story. That leads to interesting story. The next point is, can I quote very credible sources, either a World Bank or a UN or a government or some very well-known expert quoting him or her, or for example, CMI, Council for Monitoring Indian Economy. So can I quote very credible people or organization or sources? This gives authenticity. This will come later. It must start with emotion and passion, move to intellect and authenticity through great quotes. And can I also quote the decision makers and their opponents or critics related to that issue? If I'm talking about a climate issue, I started with a villager's life who is affected by the climate issue, then went on to talk about a large number of villages being affected and how we must, as a citizen, contribute in some form, and then move to the facts and figures selectively and infographically. And then I quote the right people, including experts and also decision makers, who will be usually people in government, and their critics also. So then I add authenticity with the experts and balance with the decision makers and their critics. I need to bring a balance to make a story interesting also. And I need to also quote the decision makers, because they will be bound to tell what measures they are taking and shall take. That means I bring in an element of hope. This hope may be also brought into the story through the efforts of the development organizations, NGOs, or international organizations, transnational organizations like Unicef or others, what they're doing in that particular context. So these will all bring in balance and hope. So my formula, therefore, can we bring these 6 elements? Passion, emotional quotient through human life, actual real life stories of people. Passion quotient by connecting it to facts, how we can support, or we can actually be passionately moved with it. With intellectual quotient through data and visual graphics, that is infographics and selective data. Authenticity through experts and right organizations quoted. Balance through decision makers and their critics, and government and NGOs working in that domain for hope, to bring in hope in the story. When these things are brought in, and not a press release of an organization is masqueraded as a development story, then only it will become interesting. An interesting development story shall always have an element of investigative study, because a development story is all about investigating on a given issue or a given problem. So there has to be certain investigative angle also. The next point I would like to mention to make development stories interesting, after the 6 points of interest, 6 bullet points of interest, the next thing I would like to say, we all know content is the king, whether it's audiovisual or audio or print. Is the content that makes it interesting. But please understand, content may be the king, but context is the kingmaker. And the context has to be brought in to make the story truly interesting. So if I write a story about climate change and I don't contextualize the content, I don't contextualize that story in the light of the geography of that story, the cultural aspects, the human welfare aspects, social issues and realities, local politics and legalities. In all these manner, when I bring these angles, even briefly, even with 1 or 2 lines, with 1 quote or 1 information on each, then I contextualize the content. So it's not enough to know a content. It is important to know in relation to a context. It can be time, context of geography, context of cultural aspects, human welfare, legality, societal issues, or politics. Some of these may or may not be relevant in some cases, but largely this is the context. These are the elements of the context. Can we bring the context to make the content interesting and useful, productive, relevant? Having told this, let me also tell the context may be time-wise also. So quote earlier studies or stories, reports, government outlooks, similar issues elsewhere in the world. If you can find those earlier reports, government reports, some critical reports or similar stories elsewhere, and connect, not at the beginning of the story, but somewhere down the line, depending on how big you are allowed to write the story. So this historical background adds an academic dimension. This brings in an academic significance. I must also note this today in great journalism, this academic significance of contextualizing in a given context and background is very significant. Then we surely must have photographs, video, and audio used. In the online medium, which is increasingly the mother medium, so in 20th century, it was a print-led journalism. Development or otherwise, it was a print-led journalism till towards the end of the 20th century. From the last decade of the 20th century to the period before pandemic, that means till 3 years ago, it was electronic media-led journalism. So the news media was led by the electronic media. And in the last 2.5 years, increasingly we're moving towards a web-led news media. Print and television or radio haven't gone away, but increasingly people are consuming, at least those who are connected through internet, consuming media through the web. So in a web-led news media situation, we can integrate written text, static photographs, dynamic moving pictures, and audio, the sound and infographics together. We can bring them together and create a story which actually appeals to the eyes, the brain, the heart, and the ears at the same time. At the same time, and it creates a higher recall. So if someone can create a story which is poignant literally through the words, which is strong visually through the photographs, which is telling strongly through the video, which is strong on the ears, and all of this together creating a higher recall and impact in the mind and in the heart. These will make a multimedia, a convergent development story, which will be very interesting. So tomorrow's development stories have to be convergent, multimedia, both for the brain, the eyes, the ears, and the heart. For all these elements, it must be there. So we look at an interesting development journalism in all these manners. Now let me go to some examples. I have already taken 20 minutes. Let me take the next 10-15 minutes to give some examples. So example one, very well-known example, you know, of every student of journalism like me would know this. Ashwin Sarin of Indian Express long back went to a female human flesh market, that means where women were sold, and actually bought a woman and put her in front of the press conference before the public and the media in Mumbai. You know the story of Kamala. And this story since then have been strong in my mind, because later on Vijay Tendulkar came out with a powerful path-breaking play named Kamala. I remember this also because my mother, whose formal name is Anu Chaudhary, who is no more, her home name, the name at the home, the popular name was Kamala. And that story hit me very hard. Till today, that story is so powerful. It turned into a theater. Then it turned into a Marathi and a Hindi film, Kamala, and it became very, very powerful to the extent that the government came out with a law completely banning and making and criminalizing any trade on human beings. So this was a powerful story. Now there have been stories written about, for example, powerful stories in fact written about the man who took up the fight for the sanitary, cheap and easily available sanitary napkins for women in rural India, Arunachalam. And we know, based on his life, a film Padman was made. The series of stories that came on this Padman, first in the media, was very strong, then on television some, but then later on it became a household name through the film Padman. The stories from government came on toilets. Many a time they didn't make a great impact. But when it was turned into a film, Toilet Ek Prem Katha, it became a household name, that the need of institutionalized, formalized, structuralized sanitation facilities in every home through a toilet became a household name. Such stories actually integrate human life, passion, facts and figures, that is intellectual component, visual elements, authenticity, balance, hope, and credibility, and also brings in the context of their stories. So such stories will be powerful development stories. A gentleman, you know him all, he was given the task of writing a series of stories on the poorest 50 districts of India. He was given a story to write how and why are they poor. And he made it into an opportunity. The opportunity of exposing the system that gains by making them poor. And he came out with a series in Times of India. And the selected ones of those stories were later on published. As you know, everybody loves a good drought. P. Sainath. Everybody loves a good drought comes out from the series of 50 stories in Times of India, which talked about the system that forces large-scale poverty in rural India at that point of time. The selective ones were how drought becomes an instrumental exploitation. A drought is liked by the poor, the rich, the powerful, the politician, and the police, all. And why and how? That became the subject of story. An extremely powerful development journalism, where there is emotional quotient, because it talks about real life of people, passion quotient, because it inspires you to take action, intellectual quotient, because enough of ground research, facts and figures are there, authenticity, because the experts are quoted everywhere, and real life visuals are used, balance and hope, by quoting the government, the opposition, and the NGOs also, and contextualizing each of the story repeatedly in every story. So, and also giving background and research outcomes within the story to bring in an academic element as well. Please do read Everybody Loves a Good Drought. And then from the recognition that he gets after getting Magsaysay Award for his work in rural journalism, Sainath comes out with People's Archive of Rural India, or PARI, which is a humongous collection of development journalism stories with pictures, videos, audio podcasts, and written descriptions or written textual stories as well of rural India, and made very interesting. So these are some examples I'm giving. I'm giving a couple of more examples. Alcoholics Anonymous, a story that was published in Saturday Evening Post on March 1, 1941, very popular. And then this Alcoholics Anonymous organization came up and became popular worldwide. Story was written by Jack Alexander, how those who are victims of alcoholism comes out, makes a group, a small group, and starts and remains anonymous. Nobody knows them by names. And they start de-addiction camps, counseling, and support to people who are addicted. Fabulous initiative taken in America and became a worldwide phenomenon. Today, Alcoholics Anonymous is equally active in India as well, in Bangladesh as well. I go to Bangladesh, I go to Nepal, in Nepal as well. And the world view on alcoholism changed forever through this long descriptive story called Alcoholics Anonymous that came out on on Saturday Evening Post, March 1, 1941. The story has lives, human lives. The story has photographs very selectively and with some morphing and all that. The story has credible quotes of people and experts. The story has government and critical voices also quoted. Story has several victims, several people who have come out of addiction, their opinion given, their life stories given. It's a fabulous indeed story. Amazon rainforest fire. You must be remembering it only a few years ago. And UPM pulp, environment-focused journalistic effort, they came out with a detailed story on Amazon rainforest fire. What a fabulous story, powerful story. And it will inspire everyone, both the environmentalists and governments, to take care, what to take care to avoid such mega fire incidents anywhere. I'm sure, because most of you are from Bengal, would remember the Rana Plaza fire story, fire case, Rana Plaza, huge fire that killed so many people in Dhaka, some years ago, more than a decade ago. And this Rana Plaza fire in a textile factory of Dhaka led to such a hue and cry. The international media covered it in extensive manner. Some of the bold journalists of Bangladesh first covered it in details. The visuals were very powerful. The government was bound to arrest all those directors of the Rana Plaza textile factory. And there was such a hue and cry. The world buyers, the global large textile or garment buyers, boycotted Bangladesh for a year or two, forced the government to bring in legislation that ensures minimum standard working conditions in the textile factories of Bangladesh. Today, from the 1st of January 2022, when I keep going to Bangladesh once in every 2 months for 3 to 4 weeks, I find a totally different character of textiles. Would you believe me that in an economy which is $442 billion economy of Bangladesh, which is second only to India in South Asia, this economy has $48 billion, that is 12% plus, only exports of clothes today. The world was boycotting textiles of Bangladesh. The world is buying textiles of Bangladesh today. $48 billion, 12% of Bangladesh's GDP, 82% of Bangladesh's exports. Can you believe that the country which was without clothes, the people were fighting, the boys who were fighting Mukti Jodha did not have proper clothes. They were wearing lungis and fatwas and pajamas, and they were fighting the freedom struggle. That nation of hungry people, half-clad, semi-clad people, today is clothing the world. Second highest textile producer and second highest textile exporter of the world. Can you believe that? $48 billion is their exports. Second only to China, but China is no comparison. Bangladesh is 17 crores. China is 155 crores. No comparison. It's almost 10 times, 9 times. So second only to China. Larger export of textile than India. Third is Vietnam, not even India third. So a fabulous success story. But the Rana Plaza incident was covered so extensively that it made it powerful. So I would like to also bring to you another example, the migrant labor crisis after the lockdown was announced. We had a lockdown announced, the only lockdown in the world in COVID times, which was announced with 4 hours notice. Everywhere else, the lockdown was always with 1 or 2 days notice so that people can return homes, people can quickly finish the travel and all that. With a few hours notice, only one lockdown, that too of 1.25 or 1.3 billion people. The largest quarantine in human history, because China did not go into full quarantine. The largest quarantine in human history was announced on 24th of March 2020 with 4 hours notice. And all of a sudden, lakhs and lakhs of migrant workers found themselves without a job and their landlords throwing them out without even a place to stay. Landlords threatening, if you stay, even if you don't work, you have to pay your rent. And these workers decided, corona or no corona, we don't care, but we don't want to die in alien lands. We'll stay in our lands. They started walking back walking back thousands of miles. We can't even think of walking 5 or 10 kilometers. Thousands of miles with their children, small savings. And what a fabulous human effort to survive, and what a miserable human tragedy and man-made human tragedy it was. But which media talked about it? I request you to once again go back, search all the newspapers and channels online between March 24 and April 10. Which media started talking about it? Not a single newspaper, including the best ones in the country, not a single television channel. It was web media that started talking about it. And one of the earliest, I don't know whether she was the first or not, but one of the earliest was Barkha Dutt and her Mozo channel, mobile journalism channel called Mozo. In the mobile journalism channel, from 29th March, I think first 29th or 30th March, within 5 days of the lockdown, she started covering the impact of lockdown and impact of COVID on ground. For 90 days next, one story a day, one video story a day. That was the precursor of the national and then the international, outcry against the oppression, against the miseries of the migrant laborers. It was perhaps the biggest man-made disaster after independence in India. Lakhs and lakhs, and there are no figures. Unfortunately, the government has already told in reply to an RTI, Right to Information Act, that we don't have exact figures of how many migrant laborers were there, how many traveled back, how many died, how many got injured. We don't have figures. So the point is, there has been such powerful development journalism coverage in the web that we can see how the impact of it was there across all media. Then there was a hue and cry about new Migrant Protection Act, and several state governments have come out with Migrant Protection Act, and central government has also somewhat amended their Labor Act in this context. I would like to also ask you, how will you treat a topic, a given topic? For example, UNICEF suppose organizes a good program on cyberbullying and the use of fake news to target children. This is a very important and serious problem today. Targeting children. How do you really have awareness campaign, knowledge of child rights, knowledge of cyberbullying, knowledge of cyber crime, and how to face it? Because there are various forms of, think of it. Hundreds of girls in Chandigarh University are now on the streets because someone has leaked their bathroom pictures. They are claiming that it's yet to be seen or whatever. I'm not getting into the facts, but they're on the streets having a movement, and several people have been arrested. So cyber crime, cyber bullying is a reality. So under this situation, and morphed pictures of women being nude bodies and face someone else, these sort of things are very common. So there has to be a concerted attempt to make young adolescent boys and girls aware of this so that they can fight it. Suppose UNICEF organizes a workshop on it. How will you cover it? Chances are that many journalists will start by saying, this weekend, UNICEF organizes a workshop targeting or focusing on cyberbullying and cybercrime targeting children. And in this workshop, so-and-so spoke this and that. It becomes a very boring statement people don't read. You start the thing with real life story. Start with the Chandigarh girl story. Start with another story. There are few already newspapers earlier have said that few girls have committed suicide, not in the Chandigarh case, but in earlier cases, committed suicide. Can you start with one or two such real stories? Such real stories. And then get into the root of it. Why did it happen? How could it be averted? What sort of reaction should be done? And then come to the statistics of how many such cases are coming to light. What does the National Crime Records Bureau talk about it? Come to that, and then get into the seminar done or the workshop done by UNICEF, and how and what the experts spoke there, what sort of resolution has been taken, what sort of recommendation done to the government, all that in the second part of the story. If you start with real life cases and make an emotional connect with the reader that this is not a remote problem, a problem that can affect your country, your family person, a lady in the family. And this is not just about women. It could target businesses. It could target male children also. So can you create that connect and then bring in the effort of an international organization to raise awareness and come to certain conclusions and help the government to face it squarely? Now, then it becomes a very, very interesting thing. Otherwise, it becomes an extremely boring sort of a statement. I will conclude by noting there are so many acts in India. For example, direct benefits transfer, DBT, benefits transferred to the people directly, National Food Security Act, Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, Right to Information Act and its use, Right to Education Act and its use, Manrega, Ayushman scheme for health, Mudra scheme for micro entrepreneurs, or status of sustainable development goals and its progress in India. Now, these are themes which can be written about in an extremely boring, plain, straight manner, and which can be humanized, made into stories of flesh and blood, made into stories of real people, quoting, showing lives of people, specific micro cases, and then connecting it to facts, figures, data, infographics, experts, reports and all. And again, concluding with what next? What can be done in this? How can it go to the next level? Ayushman scheme, written from a government perspective, is a great scheme of health support. From a very realistic coverage of a journalist, you will find it is basically an insurance scheme. Rather than, it's an health insurance scheme. Rather than creating infrastructure of health. Rather than, and the insurance support also comes to very small percentage of people. Those, even if you have a bicycle or a bike, bike particularly, you won't get it. If you have, there are several conditions where you won't get it. And the percentage of people who get it finally is less than 5%. And then there are certain conditions of reclaiming because the amount is fixed. So I'm not getting into that. My point is, if you really look at the application side of policies on the lives of the people and talk of the lives of the people first and then get into the facts and figures, it becomes much more interesting development journalism. I end by noting, connect emotionally first, make the story passionately strong, then intellectually through facts and figures, and infographics visually connecting or visually making it interesting through infographics, videos, and pictures. Then connect it to the, bring in authenticity, hope, and balance by experts, by decision makers and the critics and the development workers all together brought in. Contextualize each story with geography, cultural aspects, human welfare, societal, local politics, and law, all this taken together. Bring in an academic angle, quoting the past, the background, and the concepts that are there. For example, a climate change story can bring in a lot of powerful academic elements and make the story multimedia to create a greater brand recall. That's how you can make a development story or a journalistic story between a journalistic story based on a development issue really, truly interesting. Back to you, Dr. Nitesh, for taking it forward.
Thank you so much, sir, for this enlightening session on how to create development stories that are not just interesting, but also powerful. Stories that are humanized, that have flesh and blood. Now, I am opening the forum for questions. So if anyone has any questions, please kindly raise your hand.
Mr. Abhishek Das has raised the hand. Please ask.
Sir, I'm Dr. Abhishek Das from Dadapur University. Sir,
Right.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. Can I say that all developmental stories are human interest stories and all human interest stories are not developmental stories?
This is a tautology in the academic circle, I know, but first part is true. All development stories will have a human interest angle. But then there could be some development stories related to, for example, what will you talk about the cheetah versus lumping disease? What called that is lumping disease, right? Of the cows. Thousands and thousands of cows are dying today in India. And those who win in the name of the cows are more interested in 9 or 10 cheetahs. So that can be a story. It may not have a human interest in that sense, but it is a development story in a way. Because with the lives of the cows, there is a human life also connected. There is economy also connected. So, but largely, almost all, if not 100%, development stories are human stories. But all human stories may not be development. That's true. Because human stories may have various angles, whether connected to, attitudes, lifestyles, and many other, which can be broadly called human stories or human interest stories, but may not be development stories. So that would be my response, Dr. Das, to your important question. Dr.
Thank you, sir.
Argo wants to ask a question. Dr. Argo, please.
Is there anyone else who would like to
Sir,
ask?
can you hear me, sir?
Yes, Dr.
Yes,
Argo,
yes.
you are
Okay.
audible.
Sir, I want to know just one thing, just what you have mentioned, that Ayushman Bharat. But there are in many contexts like that, developing steps or the announcement, there is a conflict between, in our country, state versus center. So
Right.
like the health programs or like that. So in this regard, what should be the proper or the right stand of a developmental journalist when he is doing the report?
He must go into the roots of both. As I have said, Ayushman Bharat finally benefits less than 5% of the people because the conditions are so strict that you cannot make it to the benefit of Ayushman Bharat. And Ayushman Bharat finally is about insurance, supporting insurance, health insurance rather than infrastructure. This is one. Similarly, Shastho Sathi in Bengal, for example, there are many occasions or many cases where Shastho Sathi, the card, I think Shastho card, that has been negated by the government. I mean, the support of the financial support has not always been given. And there are also conditions that it's not easy to get the benefit. So a journalist, I may not know the truth fully, but the journalist must get into that truth and compare, both are about health, supporting health of the poor. So it can actually compare ball by ball, point by point, and see on insurance, on infrastructure, on ease of procuring the loan, on the preconditions, on the any corruption associated with procuring it, not loans, it's support, it's grant. So on 7 or 8 criteria, both can be compared, and there will be problems. There will be challenges there. Now, a good development journalist should begin with an actual beneficiary of Ayushman and someone who could not avail Ayushman, an actual beneficiary of Shastho card, Shastho Sathi, and someone who could not afford it or could not rather get it. Then go into comparative study with experts quoted, politicians quoted on both sides, people quoted on both sides. Then the real picture will come out. Otherwise, unfortunately, we are all victims of propaganda. One group rubbishes the other and tells what is their scheme is best. The other group does the opposite. So rather than the journalist should not fall prey to the propaganda, must go to real people who have been benefited or not benefited by both the schemes, then go point by point, quoting from the scheme document how they are different, useful or not useful. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else who would like to raise a question? Yes.
Okay, I would also suggest you may not have a question, but you can, one or two of you can give comments, observations, or any other examples and value addition briefly.
Sir, I do have one question though.
Yes,
sir, is it fine, sir? All right.
Yes, Dr. Nitish, yes.
So actually, this has been my observation. So let's say there is a journalist, I mean, who has joined recently in a media organization. Now, this person is from a metropolitan city and has always lived a luxurious life. And now this guy, if he or she is asked to go to maybe a remote area, maybe a village area, maybe a tribal area, in that case, that person might not have an actual understanding of what is the issue over there. So my basic question is, while finding out a development story, uh, how can a journalist actually understand what is an actual issue?
Right.
So
I appreciate that. This is a problem, particularly in English journalism. Large number of people come from very elite background, all of a sudden face social reality stories where they are accused of not knowing the background. Having told this, one may not come from Dr. Argo, would you kindly mute your device? There is an echo effect. Having told this, my suggestion here is that one may not come from a humble background, but the background does not prevent us from being an honest seeker of truth. Someone coming from humble background may also be bribed to tell something different that someone, a person in a powerful lobby wants him to tell that. And someone coming from a rich background may also be bribed or may refuse a bribe. So this can happen both sides. If you are an honest seeker of truth, you go to the grassroots, and if you are well trained to be as much as possible objective, though 100% or total objectivity is a utopia. You cannot do that. You cannot have that. But if you are truly committed to objective and realistic journalism, honest journalism, then you would like to go there, usually be a participant observer to understand the reality and then write about it. UN body says, and beyond UN theory of development communication was inspired by the Bretton Woods system, the earlier Bretton Woods system. So there the thought was development initiative will be taken at the top and it will go diffuse down the line. So it will be taken, and many governments thought that. I mean, Marshall Plan, if you remember, Marshall Plan was taken up by US government to support the development of the war-ravaged and the poorer countries, as if you can bring in development from the top to down. So that was one theory. Then came the theory of little bigger, little more participative, the theory of behavior change. So you bring in development messages and communication, try to influence the behavior of people around, and you might even make small corrections on the way, not like imposing from the top of diffusive communication. So you can do a behavior change communication by involving to some extent the people. And the communication done for COVID, fighting COVID, was a behavior change communication of washing your hands, using your mask, and keeping a distance from others. Then there is a third type of development communication, which the Latin American, the African, and to some extent some Indian writers have also promoted, the theory of participatory development communication, where you discuss an issue in a community, engage people, and through the process, you might have thought A, it might result in A plus B or A plus C, something like that. So you do not come with a ready-made, tailor-made sort of a communication and impose it from the top. You come out with a thought, and then the interaction leads to the final outcome. So that is another concept, participatory communication. So journalists may actually try to understand whether a development story, communication, or campaign is diffusive from the top, is actually bringing in a behavior change, or is truly a participatory one. Each communication will have a different character. For example, anti-COVID communication should have been somewhat behavior change and diffusive, not so much participatory. But a campaign for preservation of ecology or environment has to be truly participative, or else it will fail. And it has failed also. Such attempts to be imposed from the top have failed many a time. So we must also understand, a journalist must also understand the difference between growth and development. Growth is more in numbers. So anything that grows in numbers, in visible numbers, and development is more qualitative, it's less quantitative. Growth is more quantitative. Development is change in the life. It's not about lifestyle only, it's about true life issues. So what changes, qualitative changes have been brought in the lives of the people? That is development. Putting money, increasing allocation of money can be a growth in the budget, may not have the concomitant impact on the lives of the people. So when there is an impact on the lives of the people that can be measured qualitatively and somewhat quantitatively, then there is true development. Now, many journalists do not have these finer approaches clear. This is not a place to make a big lecture. I'm just giving some outline of these three types of development communication that happen. And honesty of coverage is primarily required beyond everything. So it doesn't matter if I belong to an elite family, educated in English medium, if I have the heart at the right place, and if I go to the grassroots and try to understand them, being a participant observer, and understanding how much is participatory communication there, how much is behavior change communication there, what are their genuine issues, and how people at the top interpret and how it looks at the bottom may be very different. If I have the eyes to understand, the nose for the news, then I can truly cover it properly, honestly, and effectively.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, is there any more questions for sir? Yes. Anyone?
Observation,
Any
comments.
observations, comments? Yes. So,
Shomik Chatterjee.
Yes.
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 A
Please.
very good evening, sir, from this side.
Yes, good evening.
Sir, my question is, PARI, you have mentioned about PARI, but PARI is essentially a voluntary effort, as far as I
Right.
know, and it has been, rather it, collects fund. Development journalism, my question is to you that, quote unquote, any effort of development journalism is not essentially that sensational. So my
Right.
question is that you have talked about the collaboration between multimedia and development journalism, but as far as the revenue earning factor is concerned, why any media organization, be it the traditional form of mass media or new media organization, would focus on or feel encouraged about doing development journalism?
If you do it interestingly, I understand the question and it's a very important question. I appreciate you raising it. If you do it honestly, impactfully, and interestingly, most important, interestingly, there will be takers. I still don't think that the world only runs on the Hindu versus Muslim issue, or the world runs on Modi versus Rahul issue, or the world runs on how many, where has Adani gone as the richest man in the world? So these are issues with which a man on the street, even forget man on the street, even us who are academics, who are researchers, they are not connected. So people never thought. I hope you remember, there are people who are in 30s, 40s, 50s here. I am an old man. I'm 56 running. I remember that at a certain point of time, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, whenever I read newspapers during election time, it was always from the eye of only castes and communities. Okay, which candidate comes from which caste? What is the percentage of that caste in that locality? All that. But today we are finding new issues have come up. Just tell me, since when has education become the dominant issue of elections? Since when has health become the dominant issue of elections? Is a series of exposes on health and education, situation at the grassroots, in every state that is going to election now or in near future. Would it not make it interesting study today? When people are talking about jobs, education, health, transport facility, and women's security. These 5, all of these more or less, in some way or the other, are development issues of the society. I am sure even climate change, water, for Bangalore just now, water is the issue. No Hindu-Muslim, no hijab, only water. Water and flooding and drainage and sewerage. This is the issue in Bangalore, the so-called IT capital of India. So the point is, we need to make stories powerful and interesting. The overall politics and society, there will be certain changes. Yes, some government has put in 25% of the budget in education and has made education a showcase across the country now. So it has become a talking point. Some governments across several states of India have focused on health, and health is becoming slowly an important electoral issue. There will be still attempts to bring in cows and Kabristan and Smasan. Everything will be attempted. But the impact they had in the past may not be the impact in the future. When people are raising questions, अरे भाई वो तो ठीक है, लेकिन हमारी नौकरी का क्या, हमारे बच्चों की शिक्षा का क्या, हमारे बीवी का health का क्या? So people are raising questions. The point is, journalists really also have to be innovative in presenting their stories. The WAR exposes a lot of developmental issues. Surviving, in some way surviving. Hindu had a rural journalism supplement. Sad that they discontinued it, but still they have some development stories coming in Hindu. Surviving. So it is tough, I agree. I mean, Bhaskar ran health stories during COVID on front page for 180 days continuously. Dainik Bhaskar ran it. 24 journalists were put on the job to expose the challenge of COVID and the failures of governments, whether in state or in the center. So it is important that we take up issues, and really today, if there is a series of stories that how to avoid Bangalore-like situation in Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, everywhere, it has a market. If you are talking about market, I will say it has a readership. It has an interest level. The point is, we have taken, just because pornography sells well, if everyone thinks journalism is equal to pornography, I can't help. I mean, you are not saying that. I'm saying in general, if people think that, we can't help it. So journalism's spirit has to be reclaimed. Asking questions to power, being a watchdog, is fundamental character of journalism. It was, it is, and it shall be. There will be certain elements and parts of media who will be completely prostrating before the government of the day. It happened in Hitler's Germany, Mussolini's Italy. It happened to a small extent in Margaret Thatcher's UK. It happened with Indira Gandhi's India. It is happening with Modi's India. It will happen in many places. And Mamata's Bengal will also arrest the cartoonist. This will keep happening. But doesn't mean that journalism changes. Is the aberration of the time, not aberration of the profession. That's all.
Thank you very much, sir, for this lovely clarification.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, sir, for addressing the queries of the participants. And
thank you, Anurag. Thank you, Ankita.
And accommodating a request for a reschedule despite not being well. So thank you so much, sir. It was indeed a pleasure to have you among us. And I wish you a speedy recovery. And thank you so much again, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Naskar. No, not to worry. It's just an
operation. Will work, sir.
It will get well.
Ma'am is also
thank
there.
You.
And sir,
thank you, Sucharita madam. Thank you for doing a fabulous job of bringing in the right issues in front of the people repeatedly and untiringly from Rajasthan to Bengal. Salute to you. Salute to you. Thank you and see you.